one more thing that I really wanted to talk about in terms of EVO is it's the indie stuff. All right, it's the indie stuff writ large. The last couple years, EVO has done a fairly good job of holding space and offering space to indie devs. And that space has been either extremely affordable or free in exchange for basically being there as an extra bullet point and doing some interviews and stuff like that. But there were, of course, some issues with the way it was handled. And we've talked over the last couple years of EVO doing the indie showcase and the trailer blocks about some of the ways in which it works really well and some of the ways it doesn't quite work as well and what we could do to maybe improve it, right? And I was really hopeful that this year was going to be a little bit different and that they were going to take to heart some of the concerns that the indie devs and the indie fans have had and maybe try to like round out some of the edges, the rougher edges. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. I don't know if it was like a changing of the guard or if it was a changing of priorities or if it was just a matter of timing. But there was little communication with the indies and the developers about the showcase. And every time some of them would ask, they'd be like, oh, we're working on something that's happening soon. Oh, we're working on something that's happening. And then it was too late, right? And this, even over the past couple of years, the lack of communication from EVO about what was happening, about expectations, about their decisions, was kind of hurting some of these indie devs. I mean, Matrified, the developer of Merfight, and formerly on the Drag Her team, wrote a blog post about this, talking about their experience at EVO last year. I don't want to put words in Matt's mouth, but my sense was that they were a little disappointed with how they were treated. And from communication standpoint, right? Being like, fine, if you're like, I'm here, I'm doing this, am I going to be interviewed on stream? I don't know. You didn't say why, right? Like, the reasons for people's trailers getting picked or not picked weren't really communicated at all. So it's disheartening, right? Look, that's kind of my worry, is that like I worried that maybe EVO saw some of the response to the indie stuff and saw some of the criticism and were like, do we really need to do it then? Instead of how can we improve on it, right? And so maybe if it was perceived as too negative, maybe that's the direction they went. But I think these are fair criticisms that people are having about the experience, right? Like, fine, don't pick my game, but like, why? What are you actually looking for so we can provide you with the thing that you want, right? Like, was it a matter of my game isn't interesting? Was it a matter of it doesn't fit with your vibe? Was it a matter of the trailer wasn't good enough? Was it a matter of I didn't have enough promotional materials, right? Like, there's all these questions that are just, and we're left with very few answers, right? And then so this year there was lack of communication leading up to it, and then nothing really materialized, right? And there were some indies who I think got maybe some discounts in order to get their stuff set up right at the very end of the game, where EVO was like, hey, can we like figure something out here? And so some of them managed to get in there, which was nice. It was at least you're there. But like, that's always the big question for these developers, right? Like, how much value are you getting out of spending possibly thousands of dollars on a booth at EVO for 10,000 people coming through the venue over 3 days, right? Or 4 days. Would you be better off spending those thousands of dollars on a booth at PAX, which will get you hundreds of thousands of people coming over 5 days, right? That might be more worth it to you. It's not a fighting game, but there are all these questions about what kind of value is this providing? What kind of value is this space providing for developers? What is it providing for EVO? And what is it providing for the community? Right? These are, anytime you do something like, anytime you put on an event, anytime you host something, anytime you provide space for a community, these are the questions you have to ask, right? How does it benefit the promoter, the middleman, and the end user, right? Event organizer, developer showcasing there, community members attending. there are always those three concerns when we're doing something in the fighting game community. What does the indie Evo space provide, right? And I think in theory for Evo, it is broad community appeal. It is part of the way that they put their stamp on being we are a big community support, we are a big tent. We have our main games, we also have these other games. The side games are important, right? It's why they do Vortex Gallery and Amiivo previously, right? It's the reason they do the community events, they do the side events, and they do as many events as possible and host BYOC areas, all these things. So that is part of what, like, the requirement for Evo, right? Also, they're a business and they gotta pay to have that space. So they also need to be able to make that space that they're providing sustainable, which apparently means several $1,000s sometimes, right? The community. For me, like I said, I think I got a lot even with like nothing actually done, with no organization for indie stuff explicitly on the part of Evo this year. I still had a good experience with indies, right? I was still able to go to the Evo arcade and check out the X Arcadia stuff. I was still able to go to a couple small booths and try out some games and check out some art from these developers. I was still able to go to the BYOC area and play in these side tournaments and check out these games being showcased by devs, right? So there was value for me there, but like I think reasonably, with a reasonably extra amount of reasonable extra amount of effort, you could do something really, really cool that would provide way more value for the community, but more importantly, more value for the developers there who are showcasing, right? Because that's the other part of it. So how do the developers who are showcasing there get value out of this, right? And part of it is building brand. Part of it is getting feedback on their game, right? These are things that you can do. Part of it is being able to, show you're part of the community. It's making connections with other developers. Like, that is a big part of why you do this, right? I went and I hosted an Artist Alley booth at Toryuken earlier on, like last month, right? What was the value for me, right? I spent, right, a couple $100 on the table. I spent whatever it cost me on my merch. It spent my time, right? It cost me my time to be there. I basically broke even on that with what I had sold, but the value I got was far greater than zero, right? Because the value I got was communicating with other artists, networking with them, finding out what works for them at Artist Alleys, what kind of places they get their stuff printed at, or what kind of resources they use, right? What are some good tips and tricks about doing this to cut down costs and to get more sales, right? I got to meet a bunch of people who I got to, get my brand out there. I got to tell people about my magazine and, got some Twitter followers. I got to chat with people who develop games while I was there. These are all things that provide me value as an exhibitor, right? And the same applies to developers who are showcasing their game at Evo. Unfortunately, I did not get to see the Terradrome folks or the Elemental Rift folks either. They also had a booth, but were not able to showcase their game because they had an Artist Alley booth, not an exhibitor booth, right? Which are different prices, right? It costs more for an exhibitor booth, which they then allow you to showcase your game at, right? And I think they did provide like special dispensation. I would say, yeah. So what Evo did do is provide special dispensation to a handful of developers to showcase their games in the BYOC area, which usually they would have had to get a booth to do. And my understanding is that in previous years, those booths were, I don't know if they were free or heavily subsidized, but they were made way more attainable for developers. And then this year, that wasn't really on offer. So they did end up getting some space at the end of the day, which is nice, but there's nothing you can rally around. There's no reliability. You are rolling the dice as a developer going there, or as a fan of these indie games going there, saying, how many am I gonna get? Am I gonna get to see the Terradrome people or Elemental Rift? I don't know, right? They might not be there. I got lucky, and several devs that I knew were there showcasing, and several new devs that I have now made contact with were there showcasing, and I was able to check that stuff out. I got to meet Joe Dev and play Hyper Fight 2. That was really amazing, right? Like, I wasn't expecting that, and then I got a great little bonus. But could you imagine going there as a developer and end up being the only one? It's hard to justify that, right? So with a couple little changes, it can go a long way. There was there was a thing going on on the Evo show floor, which they did a lot more of community groups streaming from the show floor. So Maximilian was there with the Yo Video Games crew, and they were doing a watch party, and they were streaming from the show floor and doing live commentary in the venue, and that was super cool and interesting, and it had its own vibe compared to the other stages, right? But moreover, there were streams happening from the Marvel vs. Capcom collection booth, where all weekend long they were streaming from there. From the 2XKO booth, they were doing exclusives, play with the developers and check this out on stream, right? From all these different booths, they were streaming from the show floor. Now imagine an indie booth where we could host 5, 8, 10 stations of different games, and we could stream them from the show floor. We could do interviews with developers. We could provide challenges for people at the show floor to win prizes from our wonderful artists who work on these games and have various merch for them. We could do developer interviews where we could go over these games and talk about them and find out about what it's like as an indie dev to be able to produce these. All those things that Evo was trying to do with the community showcase, with the trailers, with the interviews. You could provide the space for a handful of people, and there are more than a handful who would, I know, would be willing, able to, and happy to handle some of that stuff, right? I would more than happily do a stream for a day from the Evo show floor, being able to talk to Andrea and Joe and Bye Bye Blue and show people the game and sit down with them and have us go over the finer points of the game, show why these games are hype, and provide space and opportunity for the community to meet the developers, for the developers to meet each other, for both of them to meet publishers and the wider community. They understand it. Like, Evo as a company understands that there's value in allowing Marvel heads to stream from their show floor and play the Marvel collection, right? Just as there's value to have Griffey and fucking me and Joe and Toast and, like, guys, like, there are so many of us who would be who do this already, right? This is already the thing that we're out here doing. I think that's better for Evo. I think it takes the weight off them. It provides genuine community, which is what they're trying to express through this stuff. It provides a great platform from people who understand these games. We already have the connections. This is a pretty tight-knit group, the indie and niche fighting game scene, right? Like, there's not, obviously we don't all know each other, but, like, I'm pretty sure every single developer who has been showcased over the past 3 years, every single indie developer who's been showcased over the past 3 years at Evo, I am, like, 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon away from. We have the connections. We have this community brewing already. It could be there, man. And that would be so amazing. You know how fucking hype it would be? Like, if I walked by and I was just like, dang, that's Griffey, who is doing a primer on VF3TB, right? And is like, we're going to spend an hour going over VF3TB and we're going to have an exhibition between, these people. Fantastic, right? Move along. Hey, 3D Fighters is the game, man, right? That's what it's all about. You know who else has some interesting take on 3D Fighters? Let's talk to Andrea Dimitro about their experience making 3D fighting games in the indie scene. And go to an interview with that, and then boom, combo showcase, which has already been fucking made, right? That we can already put out there. We could do bespoke stuff, man. We have amazing editors and artists. I could rant about this all goddamn day, guys. Suffice it to say, the fact that after 2 years of, like, we can make it better, it was a drop the ball moment. There's nothing really for the indie devs. We need an indie fighting game community manager, right? Like, and so this is what I said. I'm wondering if it was a changing of priority at Evo or a changing of the guard. And if someone new is in charge of handling that and they don't have the same type of connections, then I can understand why this might fall, right? Oh, we don't have enough interest, so we can't do something, right? Like, you need to hit a critical mass of interest from exhibitors to do a showcase, right? Like, if you only have 2 trailers, it's hard to do a 30-minute trailer block. So I understand that might have worked, but if you're not approaching the developers, if they're not being communicated with, yeah, you're not going to get trailers. That's how that works. So yeah, you need the right person in a position to organize something meaningful for Evo, for the exhibitors, and for the attendees, right? Like foundationally, and I mean, and that is like, dudes, like, and I don't want this to sound too businessy. That is the core of community building, right? Like, even if it's just me hosting a session in my basement, it's got to make sense for me. It's got to make sense for the people who are attending, and it's got to make sense for anyone who's in the middle, which in that case is pretty much no one. But like, right? It's like there are always, like, in the community there are multiple parties, and especially on a big stage like Evo, if you can't justify it for one of them, that's a pillar that's holding up that entire the existence of that showcase. That space, that, you know, space being provided disappears and falls apart if those pillars of support don't line up, if don't hold up, right? So you need a solid base for all of them, but that's how you build meaningful community stuff. For some people this will be debatable, but French Bread is still a Dojin group, or at least they still say that. They're bigger than that now, though they do seem to still have that kind of core ethos. But like, and that's it. And we do have some bridges, right, from the mainstream fighting game community, the main games, to these side and niche games. There are bridges available to us, right? And Melty Blood and French Bread games are one of them. Using that as, look, man, like they like, come on, like Melty coming from the bathroom jokes to main stage game is huge, right? And it provides a link down. People understand that that's that, and then a step down from Melty is the rest of the Dojin world, and that's really interesting. Someone asked me, they were like, oh, what are you here to play? And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna play an EFC, Eternal Fighter Zero. And they're like, what the fuck is Eternal Fighter Zero? And I'm like, wild Dojin anime game, right? Like magical girl fighter. And they're like, what the fuck? And I'm like, come over here, right? And I showed them EFC, and people are playing, and they're just like, this is absolutely batty, right? And they're like, this is wild. People are doing like stupid things. Why is this so cool? And I'm like, yeah, man, there's a whole world of this. But yeah, Hayama, the idea that like Melty or Uni managed to make it to the main stage of Evo, other indie devs say to themselves, maybe that could happen to me too. And I think this is where some of the disappointment from indie devs lies, is that though that may be the promise, the way that Evo is communicating this and engaging with it is not reassuring them, and it's never going to lead to those results, and they recognize that, right? It doesn't have to lead to those results. Let's be real. The idea of some niche game making it to that stat, like, that is a 1 in a million. Melty had a very unique set of circumstances that led to that, which then provided an amazing base for future games from French Bread to grow, right? But that's like the 1 in a million, man. That's the lottery winner, right? And I don't think any dev is legitimately expecting to win the lottery in that way. But like I said, it's about being able to get some level of value out of that, whether that be better community engagement. Even like I said, being associated with that stuff, man. Like, if you can get into a circle of games, if you're a Darkstalkers-like game, then getting in with like Lunar Phase or whatever it is, right? Like, makes sense. That could work, right? I think there could be a place for Terradrome amongst the Netherrealms world, right? Why not Injustice MK Terradrome, right? Like, that's a perfectly cromulent tournament, if you ask me. Being able to associate yourself with these other games provides value for the developers. It creates community, it creates extended community, it brings in new people, it introduces you to new developers. These are all things that the value, it's not necessarily about the dollar value return on investment of what you're putting in. It's about what you can take away from that space being built. For indies in particular, I think the more ephemeral things like community building, like connections, like mindshare are far more valuable necessarily than I spent $2,000 on my booth, I made $2,000 in sales on my game, right? Like, that is not what you're going in there for. So like, don't think of it like that, but that means that when you're building it, you have to think about it from the other direction. So, I mean, all told, I think, like I said, the Evo indie stuff writ large it's a little disappointing, but it just goes to show that I still found a tremendous amount of value as an attendee, as a community member, from going to Evo. Just for the indie stuff alone, that was worth it. Where I got to play Corrupt, I got to play Hyperfight 2, Dojo Masters, Nakura Die by the Blade. Got to play an untitled 3v3 fighting game from the Tough Love Arena dev. Got to play Combo Devils. Got to play Cooking Fist. Got to play Dynamite Bomb Exa. Got to play Axel City 2. Like, these are a lot of games that we talk about and that we find important, and they were all there, readily available. Some that I knew were going to be there, some that were surprises, and something new, something old. So the fact that even with the just like the kind of I guess the courtesy dispensation to say, here, take the space, it's there. Outside of that, there was really nothing structural for these indie devs to engage with, and they still showed up. And that's a testament to the developers and the scenes and like the communities, like the niche communities' attitudes, that in spite of that, they still showed up. And so I'm going to go over, I got a bunch of footage of some of these games that I'm going to be editing through. I got an interview that I'll be going through. And I might put together a blog post with going over some of the discussions that I had with some of these developers throughout the weekend. And maybe next year we can make it even a little bit better. Maybe at Evo Nice, when Evo's in France, we can get a bunch of the European developers out there. We can get Andrea D, we can get GX Grainsun, and we can get the Frostfire team, and we can get them to Nice and have a proper showcase, right? And this is it. We have indie devs all over the world, and now we're starting to get Evos in more places. Not the Southern Hemisphere, because apparently Evo doesn't believe the Southern Hemisphere exists, but we're getting more Evos throughout the world, and having developers from Southeast Asia being able to show off their indie games, and developers from all over Europe being able to localize, and maybe eventually South America, because hot damn, some of those folks deserve some screen time too, right? So why not, right? We had a bunch of American devs coming out and showing off their stuff this time. Like, this is part of the beauty. It's why Evo is doing all of these regional ones now, and there is a little bit of Indian niche in every one of those. To think about having a Evo Latin America with proper UMK3 representation and proper KOF representation and all the different SNK games, which are huge down there, right? Europe with its Vampire Savior community and its Third Strike community has games that could be mainstay games that are otherwise niche in a lot of respects, right? Think of all of the the amazing 3D fighting game players that live throughout Europe, right? So many amazing opportunities for Soul Calibur or DOA or VF, right? Like, geez. And for that to be complemented by like the 3D fighters of Andrea D, how great would that be? Despite some disappointment with how it's all worked out, I am still highly like hopeful that we can make something work. And frankly, and if it doesn't happen, we're still building our own spaces, right? And not to say that we should be building our own spaces to prove to organizations like Evo that we are worthwhile, but by building our own spaces and having them be functional and valuable, it'll be easy to show someone like Evo, right? Or an organization like Evo that there is value here and that our inclusion is meaningful.